heavenly versus earthly places of safety and how to tell the difference. In the following video, I will not use the English word rapture, but refer to this event as the heavenly place of safety. What we are about to do is walk through the duality of Revelation chapter 12. But before we do, a brief explanation of the layout of the book of Revelation is necessary. Revelation chapter 1 serves as the introduction and gives the theme of the book of Revelation, the great and terrible day of the Lord, mentionably in Revelation chapter 1 verse 10. And the book of Revelation informs us that the actual book of Revelation itself covers the past, the present, and the future. When you notice Revelation chapter 1 verse 19. Chapter 1 of Revelation covers past, while chapters 2 and 3 cover the present, or the church age. And chapter 4 onward cover the future, things yet to come. The most common verse cited to back a heavenly place of safety is Revelation 4:1. Before the 7 years of hell on earth, before the future events happen. But I'm about to show you there's more than one witness to that in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapters 4 through 11 compose the first account of the full 7-year period. Revelation 4:1, overcomers are taken to the heavenly place of safety before the 7-year period begins. After that, Antichrist comes to power on earth with a 7-year peace treaty, according to Daniel 9:27, that he eventually breaks halfway through, and then he murders everyone he can because Satan counterfeits the resurrection and takes over this man's body. So it'll be Satan in the flesh the last 3.5 years. Revelation chapter, so the point was from Revelation chapter 4 to chapter 11, covers the first witness of the 7 years of events that lead up to the second coming of Christ. Now, Revelation chapters 12 through 14 compose the second account of those same events that happened during that will happen during the future 7-year period. Now with that backstory, let's read Revelation chapter 12 and walk you through the duality of this verse. Or not verse, but this chapter. Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. All right, so let's break it down before we read any further. So we have a great wonder in heaven. We got a woman who is clothed with the sun and the moons under her feet, and has 12 stars as a crown on her head. And she's also pregnant with child and is about to deliver the child. So now there's duality to the symbol of the woman. In the first layer, this woman represents the nation of Israel. So then the 12 stars would be the 12 tribes of Israel. And from Israel, she birthed the Messiah, or the child, the man-child that verse 5 covers. And then I'll break down the second layer as we continue. Verse 3, and there appeared another wonder in heaven. And behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So this dragon, we don't have to guess what it is. If you drop down to verse 9, it says, it interprets the dragon for us. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. So that's who the dragon is. Back up to verse 5 now. And she, being the woman, brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. All right, so let's stop right there and break it down further. So there's duality to the man-child that this woman brings forth. So as I laid the foundation for earlier, the woman is the nation Israel. The 12 stars are the 12 tribes. From her, the Messiah, who rules with a rod of iron, according to Revelation 19, verse 15, who is caught up to the throne of God. That happened 40 days after his resurrection. He was caught up, went from Mount Olives straight up. Oh yeah, and that's where he comes. Same place his feet touch and it splits it. So that's the duality, again, or I didn't explain the duality. That's the first layer. The woman's Israel, the man-child who rules with a rod of iron is the Messiah, Jesus Christ. There's the scriptures to back it up. So now let's dive into the second layer and show you, but don't believe me, let's read what Jesus said in Revelation chapter 2, verses 26 and 27. All right, verse 26. And he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations. And he, or she, talking about the Christian, the believer, because remember, the New Testament, especially the book of Revelation, is written to the Christian, the person's filled with the Spirit of God. So verse 27, and he, or she, depending upon the case, shall rule them, the nations, with, notice this, a rod of iron. As the vessels of potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father. And I will give unto him, the overcomer, or her the morning star. That's Jesus. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Remember, the scriptures too also teach that if a man thinks he knows a thing, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. So just because you understand one layer, don't stop there. Dive into the next layer and you'll see how it flows together. And that's when you know that it's a false doctrine, is because it goes against all the layers you've dived into. So according to Revelation chapter 2, verses 26 and 27, the overcoming Christian rules with a rod of iron. So notice both Jesus Christ, the King, the Messiah, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, rules with a rod of iron. And also the overcoming Christian rules with the rod of iron. And they both return at the same time, see? And that happens during the 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus and his wife on the earth, to prepare the earth for the Father to come down with the golden city after the millennium, after judgment, after all that. All right, so the woman, notice this fact, that the church is simply Israel converted and filled with the Holy Spirit. So go back to the woman in verse 1 and 2, who has the 12 stars. So when the woman is the church, the 12 stars are the 12 apostles upon whom the church was founded, according to it's Ephesians 2:20. So notice verse 5. Let's read verse 5. And she, the church, brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with the rod of iron. So again, we're applying it to the overcoming Christian. And her child was caught up. That's the Greek word harpazo, same words mentioned in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, I believe it's verses 16 and 17. So this child was caught up to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So see, both Jesus was caught up, and the overcoming Christian will also be caught up. So this verse 5, on the second layer of the woman being the church, the child being the overcoming Christian, they're caught up, because then they return with them 7 years later. That's what's known as the heavenly place of safety. So anyone who's tried to discredit a heavenly place of safety, I've never heard anybody actually dive this to put these things together. And that's not because I'm better than anyone else. That's just because it's fun to dive deeper into things, because then it shows that there's more. Like I said, that scripture, when you think you know a thing as you ought to know, you know nothing yet. Don't ever read a book thinking you know what it says, because you don't. And that's a barrier of prejudice that would block entry to any new knowledge or revelation that would come into your spirit. So we don't necessarily need to read any further, but let's notice this. Let's actually notice here, verse 6. And the woman, remember who the woman is, the church, fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days, or 3.5 years, or times, and half a time, whatever terminology you'd like to use. It's the 1,260 days. So notice from Revelation 12:6 that the church of God, or the woman, is still on earth. This represents those who came into God's church after missing the heavenly place of safety. Because see, now is the earthly place of safety, and the earthly place of safety happens in the middle of the 7 years. And I've noticed from Bible teachers often that when they confuse the two, they teach there's the R word in the middle of the 7 years. No, that's the earthly place of safety. Because in Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, the door of heaven's opened, and it's not opened again until Revelation 19 when Jesus returns. So you can knock on heaven's door during the middle of it and you ain't getting in, because in the middle is the earthly place of safety. And that's what this video itself is out to express and to help you discern the two. So those who join God's church during the first half of the 7 years are taken to an earthly place of safety before the beast system arises, the last half of the 7-year period. All right, let's prove that. Drop down to verse 14. And to the woman, the church, those who came into it after the heavenly place of safety, were given 2 wings of an eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and half a time from the face of the serpent. So that's the last 3.5 years. And the serpent cast out. So then, long story short, is let's prove that this woman is the church. You drop down verse 17. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, that keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus. So the remnant of her seed, see, the woman who was taken into the wilderness for 3.5 years are those who came into the church the first 3.5 years of the 7-year period. See? So then they're protected from the beast system. And then it's those who came into the church the last half of the 7 years are the ones murdered by the beast system. Everyone's murdered but the 2 witnesses during the last 3.5 of the 7-year period. All right. So I hope this video has helped you to discern the two. And if you don't believe in a heavenly place of safety, explain away the duality of the woman and the man-child of Revelation chapter 12.